It wouldn't be unfair to describe destroyers as being the unsung heroes of the World War II naval war. The History Office of the United States National Park Service in 1985 described their role. Destroyers were all-purpose ships whose role in fleet operations was vital. No battleship or aircraft carrier ever sailed into enemy waters without an escort of destroyers. And because they played so many roles, there are many stories of heroism for these ships who went into combat with armor so thin that they were referred to as tin cans. Among those is an extraordinary story of the Fletcher-class destroyer USS Abner Read, a ship that fought so bravely that she was sunk twice. It is history that deserves to be remembered. Built by the Bethlehem Shipbuilding Company in San Francisco, USS Abner Read, named after a Civil War naval officer, was commissioned in February 1943. The Fletcher-class were generally considered to be highly successful, with 175 vessels commissioned between 1942 and 1944. The U.S. produced more vessels of the Fletcher-class than any other destroyer class of the war. Typical of the class, USS Abner Read mounted 5 5-inch guns, 5 twin 40mm and 7 single 20mm anti-aircraft guns, depth-charge racks, and 10 21-inch torpedo tubes mounted in 2 quintuple mounts amidships. 376 foot 6 inches long, with a beam of 39 foot 8 inches and a draft of 17 foot 9 inches, the Fletcher class was built to make a speed of more than 35 knots, powered by 4 boilers and 2 steam turbines driving 2 screws. Mary Elizabeth Downing Turner is a librarian at Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas, and the granddaughter of USS Abner Read crewman Jack Coffeen. Downing Turner has compiled a record of interviews of crew members who served aboard the Abner Read, which is published under the title Memories, the Crew of the USS Abner Read, DD 526. When she was commissioned, the Abner Read was under the command of Commander Thomas Burroughs, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. Burroughs had previously commanded the Gleaves-class destroyer USS O'Brien, which had been struck by a Japanese torpedo off Guadalcanal in September 1942. While the ship survived and operated under its own power, the explosion resulted in structural stresses that in the end proved unrecoverable. While en route to San Francisco for repairs, her bottom split open and the ship had to be abandoned. USS Abner Read would be Burroughs' second command. Abner Read's first assignment was the Aleutian Islands campaign, shelling Japanese positions during the frigid and deadly May 1943 Battle of Attu. Some 34,000 U.S. and Canadian troops were landed on the Japanese-occupied island of Kiska the following August, and USS Abner Read was assigned to shore bombardment, as they had been at the Battle of Attu. But the invasion force arrived only to learn that the Japanese had abandoned the island under the cover of fog 2 weeks earlier, essentially ending the Aleutian Islands campaign. On the night of August 17th, USS Abner Read was on anti-submarine patrol off Kiska Island, screening vessels anchored in the vicinity. A ship's history provided by the United States Naval History and Heritage Command notes that to Commander Burroughs, the assignment seemed unusual in that the line ran directly towards and away from the beach and was but 6,400 yards in length, that the shoreward end was equidistant and only 2,000 yards from 3 landmarks: Blue Jay Rock, Sparrow Rocks, and possible minefields in Bluff Cove, and directly in line with the axis of the patrol. More ominously as concerned the mines, an appreciable current of unknown nature set across the axis of line K7. Nonetheless, the ship's history reports, an hour and a half into the mid-watch on 18 August, satisfied that her radar would enable Abner Read to patrol her assigned waters, Commander Burroughs turned in his emergency cabin. An action report for that night notes that the destroyer was operating at a speed of 5 knots. The sea was calm, with a 1/2-knot current running from 295 degrees true. The wind was from the south, force 2. The moon could be seen at intervals through a cloudy sky, intermittent fog patches, and mist. Visibility was about 2,000 yards. The ship's history states that those on watch topside could see the moon through broken clouds and intermittent patches of fog and mist. A 2018 edition of the Washington Post writes that Seaman First Class Darrell Weathers, 19 years old, a doctor's son from Los Angeles, was in the radar room on the bridge, standing the mid-watch, midnight to 4 a.m. "We've been doing figure eights, about 3-4 miles long," he told the Post in a telephone interview. "We've been doing that for a day and a half, and we're becoming relaxed because there was no report of anything. Everything was peaceful," he said. And the exhausted skipper, Commander Thomas Burroughs, had just gone to his stateroom for a much-needed rest. According to the ship's history, the patrol went on normally until about mid-watch. At approximately 1:43 in the morning, having obtained a fix on the nearest land, the destroyer set course 140, and the quartermaster at the wheel began steering right, maximum rudder. It was then that Commander Burroughs' concern regarding the current so close to a suspected Japanese minefield proved well-founded, as the action report explains. At 0150, 18 August 1943, while making a turn with full right rudder at the shoreward end of the patrol line, the stern of Abner Read apparently struck and detonated a drifting mine on the port side. Sea mines were a significant risk in the Second World War, with more than 500,000 laid during the war. Weathers told the Washington Post that he recalls Commander Burroughs saying, "I got a responsibility here for every one of these kids' mothers to bring them back home again." I was touched by that, Weathers said, but he went down into his cabin, and about 30 minutes later, bam! Weathers said that when the mine went off, the whole ship came out of the water. Crewman James Alcorn told Downing-Turner, "I had gotten about 50 feet forward of the K-guns on the starboard side of the main deck, and bluey, it went." The action report writes that a geyser of water about 40 feet high was observed on the port side, although no flash nor flame was observed and no fires resulted, and the shock effect was not serious. Alcorn explained, contrary to popular belief, there was no loud explosion or big flare of fire or anything in the sky. It was just a terrific thud. The ship raised and I almost went to my knees. Then it settled down again. But the damage was serious. The report writes, the port shaft stopped immediately and the starboard shaft froze in about 2 minutes. The ship lifted at once 4 degrees to port and changed trim a small amount to the stern. Alcorn noted, I looked aft, and the number 5 turret was in a very strange position. It was canted clear to the starboard side and swinging out. Crewman Orville Beardsley, a cook, was in an aft compartment shared by the cooks and bakers. At the time of the explosion, we opened the hatch to go out, he recalled, and we were looking into the water. Crewman Charles Abela told Downing-Turner that he was stationed in the number 2 5-inch shell room. The blast knocked most of the shells off the rack and pinned me between them. The injury left Abela with a lacerated left leg that required that he be sent to a hospital to recover. Crewman Joseph Bakika, who had survived the sinking of USS Laffey at the November 1942 naval battle of Guadalcanal, had been asleep in his bunk in the forward part of the ship. He recalled, I had a rude awakening when I landed from the upper bunk to the deck. Immediately, the general alarm was sounded and the ship was brought to battle stations. Because there were reports of men in the water, the word was passed not to abandon ship into the frigid water. Alcorn reported, I heard the captain on the bridge say, "What the hell happened?" Evidently, it was the officer of the day on watch there who said, "I don't know, sir, but don't you think we'd better find out?" To add to the confusion, the explosion had set off the ship's smokescreen generator, which the Washington Post writes was belching toxic smoke and choking survivors. The non-combustible chemical FS smoke agent was used to produce a thick smoke that could screen vessels from observation or fire. But the chemical itself is corrosive. The action report notes that several FS smoke generator tanks were blown forward. Fractured of these generators permitted liquid FS to escape and caused many casualties to personnel from burns and suffocation. The smoke formed a blanket which enveloped the stern from about frame 168 aft, penetrating the damaged living spaces and hindered rescue of personnel from the rapidly sinking stern. While the starboard shaft initially continued operating, the action report states that a heavy thumping noise developed in the starboard reduction gear and the engines were stopped. At 0154, 4 minutes after the detonation, failure at frame 170 was complete, and the stern, including 5-inch gun number 5 and the steering gear, drifted aft and sank immediately. Weathers told the Post if you took a cigar and hit it with a baseball bat and broke off the end, that's the way it looked. Burroughs immediately radioed for help, broadcasting over low-frequency radio that the ship had been hit by an underwater explosion. When the task force commander asked whether the Abner Read needed assistance, Burroughs responded, "Affirmative. There are men in the water." The Benson-class destroyer USS Bancroft was patrolling nearby and rushed to the scene. Just 20 minutes after Abner Read had gone to general quarters, Bancroft's captain reported being right close aboard. Men had been thrown in the water in the explosion and resulting confusion. Weathers had gone to his anti-aircraft mount when the ship was brought to battle stations, but with nothing to shoot, he quickly began helping to pull men from the water, a task made more difficult because there was oil in the water. He told the Post, everybody was so slippery, you couldn't get a hold of anybody. Alcorn said that there was some young sailor, I don't know who he was, a big husky young fellow who was down over the side of the Jacob's Ladder, or sea ladder, rather, with a line around his waist. He was passing 2 or 3 people up to us, and we pulled them up on deck. We pulled up a few, Weathers said, but they didn't last too long in the cold water. You weren't good for more than 10 or 15 minutes. One of those pulled from the water was crewman Boyd Anderson, who had been asleep in his bunk amidship when the explosion occurred. Sure that the ship was sinking, he and another sailor tried to swim away, but when they realized how cold the water was, they swam back to the ship and were pulled up from the water. Crewman Francis Britton had been on the bridge when the explosion occurred. Realizing that men were being pulled from the freezing water, he and some other crewmen were sent to collect blankets. He told Downing-Turner, "We were wasting no time when it suddenly occurred to us that this bucket may be sinking, and we're below decks. Those blankets got to where they were needed in record time." It was not an idle threat. The crew was now fighting to save the ship. The action report states action was taken promptly to establish flooding boundaries, remove as much water as possible, and bring the vessel to an even keel. Watertight doors were holding. Fuel was then being pumped from forward tanks to correct the list and from aft to forward to improve the trim. But the ship was dead in the water and drifting in a 1/2 knot current towards the suspected Japanese minefield. Alcorn recalled that there was a boat in the water and you could hear voices. Everything after that was just confusion. Ordered confusion, but still confusion. The ship was saved by the quick arrival of USS Bancroft. The ship's history states, Bancroft, having made all preparations to tow her sister by 0225, maneuvered on the latter's port bow to pull the tow cable over, an evolution that consumed 20 minutes, during which time Abner Reed, damaged and helpless, logged 51 fathoms beneath her keel. Bancroft's line kept the Abner Reed from drifting towards shore until an ocean-going tug, USS Ute, arrived and took the stricken vessel under tow. When Commander Burroughs mustered his crew, 70 were missing, but only one was known dead. Radioman 3rd Class Leighton W. Dean had been pulled from the water, but had been declared dead by drowning. 47 men had suffered wounds, ranging from multiple injuries to burns and fractures. 20 of the 47 had suffered FS chemical smoke inhalation. The 70 missing men were never recovered, making for a loss of 71 officers and men from a crew of 336. Crewman James Amis noted the capriciousness of death. "I happened to be on watch at the time in the aft fire room. Otherwise, had I been in my bunk asleep, I wouldn't be here to tell about it. I don't believe one person escaped from the compartment who was asleep at the time of the explosion." Crewman Maxie Bauer, a veteran of Pearl Harbor, put it more simply. "My best friends were lost in the stern's sinking." Despite the extent of the damage, the Abner Reed was towed back to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, and repaired. The destroyer went back to sea December 21st, 1943. The destroyer participated in the New Guinea campaign in the invasion of Hollandia. On November 1st, 1944, the ship was patrolling in Leyte Gulf when she came under attack by kamikaze aircraft. The ship's history reports, at approximately 1341, a Val bomber burst into flames and crashed towards Abner Reed. A bomb from the raider dropped down one of the destroyer's stacks and exploded in her aft engine room. The plane, in the meantime, came down diagonally across the main deck, setting fire to the entire after section. The ship lost water pressure, and this made firefighting efforts impossible. At 13:52 hours, a tremendous internal explosion occurred, causing her to list about 10 degrees to starboard and to sink by the stern. At 14:50, Abner Reed rolled over on her starboard side and sank. Destroyers quickly came to the aid of the survivors, rescued all but 22 members of Abner Reed's crew. Weathers told the Washington Post, "It was a bad luck ship, but I came through it, so I was lucky. A lot of people didn't." The USS Abner Read was one of 19 Fletcher-class destroyers that were lost during the Second World War. The experiences of her crew are a testament to the dangers faced by, and the courage of, the tin can sailors. In July 2018, 75 years after she struck the mine off of Kiska, a team of scientists, divers, and archaeologists from Project Recover, a partnership of the University of Delaware, the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, and funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, discovered the missing section of the ship in just under 300 feet of water. Paul Taylor of the Naval History and Heritage Command told CNN that no recovery effort will be made. "The Navy has a long-standing tradition that sites like these are a fit and final resting place for those who perished at sea," he said. "It's a war grave, and we treat it as such. It's a very humbling experience to be part of," lead archaeologist Andrew Petruska told the Washington Post. "Even without the recovery of the remains, families can find some solace that somebody found where their loved one is, that you can put that to rest." Rear Admiral Sam Cox, director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, wrote in 2018, "The discovery of the stern section from the mine strike in 1943 is a testament to the rich history and heritage of the United States Navy and the honor, courage, and commitment with which sailors of all generations serve. In a 2018 interview, Darrell Weathers told CNN that he believes that he is the last surviving crew member of the USS Abner Read. As of the making of this episode, the 99-year-old resides in Seal Beach, California. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.